My name is Yvonne, and I'm your host for the next 90 minutes. I'm very excited to listen from you, especially when it comes to questions. Please send them via chat in Zoom or via Slido. I will forward it to the moderator, and hopefully we have the chance to have 2 to 3 questions answered in the end. I will forward my word now to our moderator of the day and only can say the stage is yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ania Wieckowski. I'm an editor at Harvard Business Review. We're delighted to have you here this afternoon, this morning, depending where you are. We're going to be taking a new look at the classic topic of management versus leadership. Years ago, I was on the team that moderated Harvard Business Review's LinkedIn group. And by far, our most popular conversations on that group were always about the central question. Anytime anybody would post about management versus leadership, that thread would just blow up. And people wanted to talk about what's the difference between the two and where they fit in. So I'm looking forward to a lively conversation about this. There was a set of studies recently published by the Academy of Management, which confirmed what we probably all suspect, which is that these days, anyway, leadership activities tend to be more highly regarded than management functions. Setting a vision, inspiring, versus sort of organizing and supervising. That study even showed that people with leader type skills are seen as more valuable in situations that call for management type tasks. But in the same study, when participants were asked to slow down their thought process, they started to see managers as more valuable, especially as regards to calculating and problem solving type tasks. And then there was Peter Drucker, who avoided that argument altogether and talked about an effective executive, someone who both sets a vision and runs a good meeting. So let's start off our session with a poll. Which do you think is more valuable, what leaders do or what managers do? You should see the poll in front of you. And as you respond, I am going to take a moment to introduce our panelists today. Barbara Kellerman, if you would wave, is a lecturer in public leadership at the Kennedy School at Harvard University. She is the author of many books on leadership and followership, most recently, Leaders Who Lust, Power, Money, Sex, Success, Legitimacy, and Legacy. Julia Hobsbawm is Honorary Visiting Professor of Workplace Social Health at Cass Business School. She's chair of a new UK Workshift Commission and author of The Simplicity Principle, 6 Steps Towards Clarity in a Complex World, which has just won the New York Big Book Award for 2020. Ricardo Vargas is Executive Director of the Brightline initiative. He specializes in project management and implementing innovative global initiatives. And Vlatka Hlupic is Professor of Leadership and Organizational Transformation at Hult Ashridge Executive Education and CEO of the Management Shift Consulting. She is author of The Management Shift and Humane Capital. All right. I'm not sure. I can't see our poll results on the screen, but I would love to share them with oh, here they are. I would love to share them with the folks on the live stream who I don't think can see them. And it looks like our winner is that neither leaders or managers are more valuable. And folks think it's a false distinction anyway. And that a good leader needs both management skills. A good leader needs management skills, and a manager needs leadership qualities as well. So that's great to hear. Though I will note that the category that received the fewest votes is managers, which is a little sad, and maybe speaks to exactly what that AOM article recently found. So let us just dive in to our presentations. We're going to have some brief introductions from our speakers, and then we'll have a more informal conversation that follows, and we'll dig into some of these ideas. So Barbara, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Ania, and hi, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here, to be among you. And I look forward to almost 90 minutes of interesting conversation with, I hope, also a lot of members of the audience involved and lots of questions, not just a handful. So let me try briefly to put this into a bit of historical perspective. Ania, you stole my first line, which was very mean of you, but it was to point out that Drucker did not himself, Peter Drucker did not himself come down on either side of the leadership management debate. At the same time, he himself was called, as we all know, often anyway, the founder of modern management. So let me put this, the debate, I should say, frustrates me no end. I think it's mostly unnecessary back and forth over semantics, but as Ania said, it remains important to many people, so it's appropriate for us to address it. So let me put the debate into a little bit of historical perspective. So the key point here is that until relatively recently, the word that was used was management. It was not leadership. Leadership is a relatively recent addition to the conversation. So for the first part of certainly in the 19th century, but for most of the 20th century, the word that was used, again, was management. So some of you will have heard, for example, of Mary Parker Follett, and one of her great pieces on the subject was titled Management as a Profession. No mention of the word leadership. So that raises the question of why did the word change from management to leadership? What happened so that business schools, the private sector, the public sector, God knows the school, not just the school where I am, the Harvard Kennedy School, but Harvard University across the board uses the word leadership. The word leadership is in almost every one of the school's mission statements, and by and large, pays scant attention to the word management. So there were various crises, I could go on about this, but won't, in the 60s and 70s, both in the private sector and in the political sector, which made people recognize that the effort to professionalize management, which goes back to the 19th century, and as I said, well into the 20th, essentially had failed. Management had not become a profession. So interest in management was waning. Interest in leadership at the same time, for various reasons, again, I don't have time to go into them, was increasing. And gradually in the 70s and 80s, by that I mean, of course, the 1970s and the 1980s, and certainly by the 1990s, and certainly by the 21st century, the word leadership had come, I would not say to replace management, but I would say to be every bit as important, and as already was indicated, that started the debate about what is the distinction between the two. And as Ania did mention, in general, leadership is thought to be of a somewhat higher station, correctly or incorrectly, than the word management. Now, what happened people have tried to make the distinction between leadership and management. If we have time, maybe I'll go into some of those distinctions. A physician by the name of Abraham Zalesnik did, Warren Bennis did. There's a fair amount of literature on how to distinguish between the two words. My point, however, is that however eminent those articles and however well known they are, in fact, they never stuck. The reason we're having this conversation in 2020 is because there has been no agreement among types like us, within the academy, within the world of business, certainly within the world of politics, on what exactly the two words mean. And one of the things I wrote about in one of my relatively recent books called Professionalizing Leadership is how it has not benefited any of us that we are still having what I would argue is a rather well-worn debate. So I will conclude my introductory comments by saying, what can we do, particularly an organization or association such as the Drucker Forum, what can it do to settle, to use the word Ania used earlier, and I kidded her, and I said, are we supposed to be settling this debate? Not bloody likely, but at least to move the debate along so that we wouldn't have a panel like this in 5 years. So I would argue that there is a role for the Drucker Forum and for other institutions and organizations. May I mention another one, Ania, the Harvard Business Review. They might consider taking a stand. And what would a stand involve? It would involve defining the two words. Obviously, people would get a lot of flack, but so what? That's what we're here to do. It would be to define the two words in a way that neither one is superior to the other, but at least they have some coherence, some definition. It would be to define them, and certainly for the Drucker Global Forum, in a way that is in keeping with Peter Drucker. It would mean using the words therefore consistently from that point on, and if necessary, every time over to provide the definitions that are being used. By the way, it doesn't particularly matter how you define them. It just matters that we get some consistency. It matters that we would then proselytize for these definitions. We would try to spread the word about them. And we hopefully would, and these are my last words, that we would thereby do both management and leadership a favor by contributing to what I call the professionalizing of leadership, and yes, also the professionalizing of management, a struggle that we are still continuing today as we did 50 and even 100 years ago.
Thanks, Barbara. You've set us quite an agenda for this discussion, so thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Julia for her remarks.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Barbara set a very high bar. I'd like to begin by saying I'm so sorry we're not together in person, and to also thank Richard Straub and his incredible team who have just had to move mountains to get us all here. I realise I often accidentally in my head call him Richard Drucker and have to remind myself that he is in fact Richard Straub, but he is of course the embodiment of Drucker. So it's a great pleasure to be with you. I love this question. I love this question partly because if I can just begin with the provocation, I don't think it's actually the point. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a writer. I write about what I call social health. I've been very interested in how the human operates as an individual in their lives and corporately in the digital era. It's surrounded by complexity. Our biggest challenge, I believe, is cutting through complexity, getting things done. And I wrote several years ago now about the so-called marzipan manager, stuck below the leadership icing. So I know that both the manager and the leader, you know, it's not just a tussle for supremacy, but everybody's a bit stuck. And what interests me is how to achieve, and it is no accident that it's the subject of my new book, how to achieve simplicity in a complex age, because unless we cut through the complexity, we don't get anything done. And I think the whole point of what we're about, whether we are observers and commentators or teachers or doers, that's the whole point. And I think that the literature and the practice of leadership and management somehow fails in the number one principle, which is really action and not words. And I hope we have a really interesting discussion about the leadership and practice around the COVID crisis. So I'm just going to say a few remarks about why I don't actually think it's relevant, why I sort of back up my provocation. And I'm going to give you the 6 things that I think do matter. And 6 is a particular number I like, even though Peter Drucker, of course, posed 5 questions. My entire management principle is based quite deliberately around 6, for the simple reason that it is the mathematically perfect number, that it's within the working memory limit of 7, that it is fantastically prevalent culturally and in science and in nature, and the post the species for getting things done, regardless of whether they are labeled as a leader or a manager, is in fact the humble honeybee who lives and works in a hybrid way in the 6-sided hexagonal honeycomb that they build. And the point is, we're all living a blended life of living and working in the same place too. thanks to COVID and thanks to the shift in work. And so where the first principle is that we have to learn how to behave and how to act and how to take agency out of a world that makes it very sticky and difficult, we also have to appreciate the hybrid role. And so my other argument against being distinct about management versus leadership is to Barbara's point that really it's a hybrid world now. And the best leaders are the best managers, and the best managers are the best collegiate players. So this distinction, I just fail to see how in the end it's useful. I really liked Margaret Heffernan's reframing of the concept of leader yesterday as partly an artist, I might say an author, and so on. But in the end, what matters surely is that we do stuff, that we are hybrid in the way we do it, that sometimes we stand back to hear what's being said to us, that sometimes we jump in and direct the traffic and the course of the conversation, and that we appreciate that the forces of the world in which we are in mean that no organization is an island. And so to some extent, the concept of leadership as being a siloed, erect being, like the skyscraper epitomized capitalism for the last 50 years, well, it doesn't anymore. The way and where and how we work is changing. So we have to overturn the language, the assumptions, I believe, which brings me to the third principle, which is just keep it real. Whether you're a manager or a leader, whatever it says on your particular tin, what's going on? Is your organization happy, functional? Does it have what I call social health? Are you connected in a functional way which uses your resources well? Or are you all on Slack and Dropbox and not looking each other in the eye? And even having a Zoom meeting in the middle of all of this horror is so much better than just typing away documents to download. So I'm going to leave you with three thoughts which denote what I call social health. It's called the knot. I've spoken about it before at the Drucker Forum. It's three ingredients which, if you took physical and mental health relying on what you eat, how you exercise, and how you rest, my three ingredients for social health, for simple cut through of complexity, if you are in charge, if you are a leader or a manager, are as follows: knowledge, networks, and time. And very briefly, on knowledge, the biggest crisis is always a crisis of trust. The biggest crisis of trust at the moment is around information and media. And the organization that leads, the person in that organization who is part of the team that delivers, is a person who delivers trust. And trust around information is absolutely crucial. I urge you to create what I call a knowledge dashboard of sources that are shared and relied on and collegiately produced in collaboration with what do we need now, what do we need to know, what do we not know. The second point is networks. My goodness, we miss the networks. Everyone was terribly sniffy about networks and networking for so long. When I was made the world's first professor in networking, goodness, people were snooty. The International Herald Tribune, now defunct, thought it was a joke. Well, networks and networking aren't a joke, are they? We really miss them. And the science of networks shows fantastically clearly the power of diversity. And you could say that the network science has been the outlier for what managers and leaders, whatever you call them, are beginning to understand about delivery in terms of equality of opportunity and voice and presence in organizations. So networks are completely critical. And finally, time, timeline, deadline. When do we do what we do? Why are we doing it? I'm not the first person to say that it's time to reframe and reset the way that large corporations and political entities judge success and delivery. That's what all leaders and managers are judged by, is success and delivery. And it's quite weird that we persist in judging that leadership, management and delivery on deadlines that are basically no more real and no more helpful and no more trustworthy than fake news. So I'm going to leave you with a mantra that I was given when I was 22 and the book publicist for the late, great Maya Angelou. I know, a lucky break I had very early on. And she always used to say to me, keep it simple, sweetie, which was a take on keep it simple, stupid, that very famous design principle. But because we're in a feminized world, a world of, I hope, more engagement with the humble, with the humane, I would say, whatever you're doing, have sympathy for your fellow colleagues, keep it real, get results, doesn't matter what you call each other, and take an approach to leadership and management, which is simple and sweet. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Coming strong with the idea of the hybrid manager and leader. I'm going to turn it over to Ricardo to give us his thoughts.
Okay. Hello, everyone. How are you? So I feel humbled to be here. I'm not a management expert, so my full background is engineering. So I'm a chemical engineer with a PhD in civil engineer. So I work on that very big piece of execution. And I need to start one thing. When I saw the questions, Ania, and the second one about management and saying about execution, and I want just to challenge, because when I left the school and start, I would say, managing large projects, I thought that, a good programming, the good scheduling, a good budgeting will make it happen. And then suddenly, with all my engineering skills, I went to the field and I saw that it's quite different in reality. There is a massive amount of work that need to be in place, that go above and beyond the techniques you use to execute. And I want just to share with you one example. I was fortunate for 5 years to lead the project management and infrastructure group at the United Nations. And I want just to make all of you think that what it takes to build a school in South Sudan or a road in Afghanistan, I'm talking actual, or, a small hospital in Haiti, or removing the chemical weapons in Syria. Many people think, okay, this is just a brick and mortar and you put there. And the smallest challenges we faced during all of our time was human, was leadership. It's how you get people to trust you, that you are doing something that will elevate them. And this brings me to one point that for me is the only thing I want to say today, is that we are facing, if you want to call it a leadership or a management, whatever, we live in a major crisis today regarding our leaders. We are surrounded by, I make a generic statement, but a quite big group of very egocentric leaders everywhere that, they stop in understanding. And Barbara, I want just to thank you for your note just before they don't know what fellowship is about. They don't know what is the knowledge is about. They are so egocentric and self-sufficient that they think that they know medicine on COVID, that they know international relationship, that they know everything. And this is driving the society to the polarization we are facing today. And last year at the opening of the forum, I did one remark that I want just to reinforce again, because last year the topic was about ecosystem, is that we need to reframe the way we move our society. Because, today we think that, for example, on COVID, that I live in Portugal, that the problem is, okay, Portugal, solve your problem. There is no way Portugal can solve its problems without creating a solution that solves the problems for everybody. And this is what is putting us in test. And this is, for me, leadership. You know, it's this empathy with the other, this human aspect, and this is what we are seeing. You know, every time I watch the news, I get really scared, you know, because we think that we have an airplane and those who are on the cockpit have no clue of what, you know, the panels are showing to them. And and this for me is the critical importance. I don't want to talk about, okay, is management better? Is leadership better? Because for me, this is a matter of semantics and this is irrelevant. We need people that are able in the human side to drive the society forward. If we call this leadership or if we call this whatever we want to call, this is what we need. And this is the critical ability to get things done. So that's all I have to say. And thank you very much for the opportunity. Okay, Ania, back to you.
Thanks, Ricardo. Really giving us that sense of urgency about maybe not why this specific question is important, but why it can drive us to one that really is. Vlatka, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be part of this forum again. I've been attending the Drucker Forum for 8 years, and never before I felt such a sense of urgency. And I completely agree. Julia said it's not the point, it's just a label. Management, leadership, I agree with Ricardo that this is a critical time. So I'm just going to take you through a very brief presentation. If you could please get some slides. So while we are waiting for the slides, I will just like to say that I very strongly feel that we need a revolution in management and leadership to move away from old to new ways of working and living. Even before this pandemic, we saw low levels of engagement, lack of purpose and passion for work, low productivity and performance, and even toxic workplaces where, for example, in the case of French telecom company, leaders were sued because they created a deliberate culture of fear that led to 19 suicides. We need a big shift in organizations and at all levels of the society. We need a new renaissance. A renaissance of humanism with social and economic justice based on human values, where we can build more humane workplaces and society. This is very important as the humanity is now writing the next chapter of its evolution right in front of our eyes. At the time when we are at the crossroad, we have the biggest responsibility to get the notion of leadership and management right. And as I said, the labels are not that important. So if you can please move to the next slide. So the world has shifted, and this is a new game now that requires a new approach to management and leadership. We need new, radical, humane leaders and managers to move away from hierarchical command and control. If you could please click on the next part of the slide, to move away from micromanagement, where people are treated as cogs in the machine or just as a numbers on a spreadsheet, where there is a corruption and toxic organizational cultures. So this command and control only works where we have a situation where safety, security, compliance are critical. Otherwise, they just don't work. So we need to invert the pyramids with one leader, where one leader usually is at the top, and then there's some managers underneath, and then everybody else. This can lead to tyranny, and it perpetuates duality and lower levels of mindset and organizational cultures. So we need to move towards leadership, which is an inverted pyramid based on trust, transparency, meritocracy, purpose, compassion, freedom, making this world a better place and having fun working, as culture resides in the heart of people, not within the walls of office buildings. The difference between managers and leaders is diminishing. Managers can emerge as leaders, and true leaders should lead as collective, using some kind of a round table style of leadership, as no one leader can have all the knowledge and wisdom to make the right decisions. We need less of traditional management as brick and mortar offices were managers' kingdoms. Now we need more of a new humane leadership where leaders can emerge everywhere, as leadership should not be about a formal position in an organization. It should be about service to humanity. Leadership everywhere is overtaking management in office buildings and in virtual workplaces. And if you could move to the next slide, please. So we know from neuroscience that with our thoughts, emotions, and behavior, we all create ripples. And leaders create the biggest ripples and can play a critical role in creating new, more conscious organizations that will help create a better new world. And each and every one of us needs to remember how powerful we are. Unleash that power, unite, work on something much bigger than ourselves. Spread the ripples and write a new, more enlightened chapter for the humanity. Every thought and action count. We need to choose them wisely and step up as leaders. And it is time to act now. Thank you.
Thanks, Vlatka. So at this point, we'll switch over to our more of a conversation style, where we'll more actually speak between the five of us. But I wanted to bring it back. I'm keeping an eye on the chat, and there's already a sort of conversation there happening about the semantics of the conversation of management versus leadership, and whether that's a good conversation to have. But I wanted to start there because I think Barbara set us up to really think about what the definitions of these terms are, and perhaps if we can't settle or at least talk about what those definitions are, how do we even know we're talking about the same thing? So Barbara, I'm going to start with you. Can you nudge us maybe in the direction of how you'd think about coming to those definitions and why that's important?
Well, Ania, I'll try. It's interesting, between the chats and the comments by myself and you and my co-panelists, I am having a feeling that while there are a good number of people who remain interested in the semantic distinctions between the two words, I think there are equally a good number of people who are going, okay, been there, done that. Maybe it's time once and for all to put that issue to bed. I'm not sure, and I don't mean to be redundant here, but I can't help myself. I'm not sure there's a way to avoid redundant. As I said in my opening remarks, how do we avoid having the same conversation 5 years from now? Because the question's going to keep, we can want to put it to bed, but there are other people who are going to find it sort of endlessly interesting, but it's problematic. I'll give you an example. At many schools, and I'll include my own, you have a sort of program that's called leadership, but then you look at the names of the actual courses and the word management is in there. Well, what are we doing to our students? We're not helping them figure out what in our heads may be a distinction or maybe not, but we're often using the words synonymously and interchangeably and as if they're fungible, which of course they're not, or they shouldn't be. If we conclude they're one and the same, if we conclude that every leader needs to be good, every good leader needs to be a good manager, every good manager needs to be a leader, then let's come out and say that. If we want to distinguish between them, then I think we need to do that. Now, just one more word, Ania, I don't want to go on too long. Who is the we that I keep talking about? I have, in the book, Professionalizing Leadership, I looked at what other professions did in order to professionalize themselves, in order for them not to indefinitely wrestle with semantics. And they did have ways of coming together, which the fields of leadership and management have not. For whatever reasons, and God knows, I'm sure we all have our theories, we have not, as a group of people who are so-called experts, been able to come together to work together. By the way, this is not only about working together on definitions such as the important one that we're talking about, or if it's not important, we should come out and say so, but it's about working together on a host of other things, such as, for example, do we think that for somebody to be a good leader / manager, there needs to be a core curriculum? Are there things that every good leader, every good manager should learn on the route to becoming a professional person, whether, again, the word leadership and manager is irrelevant here. In other words, I think we have been inordinately bad at organizing ironically, by the way, since we're all about leadership and management, ironically very bad at organizing ourselves, partly because we don't have, and I'm going to go back to a word that if anybody knows my work will know I use all the time, because we don't have good followers, where everybody wants to be a leader, nobody wants to be a follower, and we have therefore not gotten our act together. So I return to my original suggestion, which is that if this is an important question, those groups and organizations that think it might be important, and I use the Drucker Forum for obvious reasons as an example, they should put together a small working group and say that from here on in, this is how, in the context of the Drucker Forum, this is how the words will be used. This is a perfectly fine, and it will be by experts who've thought about this, and you plant your flag. And this is, you say, this is in our sphere, we can't control other spheres, but in our sphere, this is how we will use the terms. And I would propose that that's a way of putting the issue to bed. People don't have to agree with with the definitions that the Drucker Forum might come up with, but at least they wouldn't be, as I said, 5 years from now, having a panel on the same issue. What are the differences with leadership and management? Which ones are better? Yada, yada, yada. Essentially, conversations that have been around for quite a long time.
I wonder if now is a particularly auspicious moment to have the conversation, though, because I wonder whether those definitions are changing or whether we want them to change. And I'm thinking about the title of this conference, Leadership Everywhere, and the idea that leadership has sort of taken on this elite, by its definition, an elite sense. But is there a way in which we want leadership to be accessible in more ways to more people? And in that sense, do we need to change the definition? Is there something about the definition that we've been circling around that's actually keeping people out of leadership positions in an important way?
Yeah, I'll just answer in one sentence. Ania, it's a great question. I think the answer is that a great definition would transcend place and time. It would not. As you said, of course, leadership has changed and followership has changed. It's going to be different 3 years from now and 30 years from now from what it is today. But a great definition transcends space and it transcends time.
I want to encourage our other panelists to jump in if they have anything to add there.
I'm happy to jump in. I mean, I agree with Barbara. I think it's a very good idea of a working group. You know, I think the word agency is quite a good boundary spanner between leadership and manager. You know, it is about who does what. And the concept of leadership is everywhere is because you can't fail in your obligation, whether you are on the front line or whether you are in the middle of the management pyramid or whether you are the leader. And so I think what matters is to, yes, brush up the definitions, why not? But, you know, I worked for years in public relations and was endlessly told, you know, oh, you have to call it something else. It's been so maligned as and I was like, yes, but, you know, you could rename democracy, you could rename love, you could rename all these terms, and it doesn't really get you anywhere. What gets you anywhere is the behavior change. And to Ricardo's point, so many people, let's also pin the tail on the donkey, as we say in the UK. Pinning the tail on the donkey, the problem actually isn't managers, it's leaders. The problem is the deification of leadership as an idea that there are, you know, supreme beings who are able to bestow greatness on everybody beneath them. That is an outdated model. We know manifestly that political leaders and a good many corporate leaders, they take the C-suite, they take the, you know, I'm not saying they don't start off with good intention, but they become siloed and divorced from reality. So for me, I just feel like, yes, let's interrogate the tension between the two, but let's talk about what the agency and the action delivers, which is, you know, Vlatka's Renaissance and Revolution.
And perhaps I could add that it really depends where you are on the 5 levels of management leadership maturity. The mindset and organizational culture, I will explain very, very briefly in the context of the management chief framework with the 5 levels of individual mindset, and there is a corresponding organizational culture at each level. Every level is characterized by specific thinking patterns, language use, behavior, emotion, and also organizational outcomes. So, and these are the psychological anchors for each of the levels, this mask I have here. So at level 1, there not much is happening. There's lots of fear, depression. At level 2, people do minimum they can get away with just to get their paycheck. They bring the body to work, but their heart and mind stay at home. At level 3, we have traditional command and control micromanagement, the place that I said we need to get away with. And at that level, we still need managers, and we have this command and control, and some elements of that are needed for safety, security, compliance reasons. But at those levels, we have low levels of engagement, performance, profit, all these things that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. So we need to move through the big shift. We need to get to level 4, where the keywords are this inverting pyramid with trust, transparency, purpose, and so on, where everything changes. And at that level, we can get managers stepping up as leaders. At that level, people can emerge as leaders if they have the right knowledge, although they may not have the right position in organizational hierarchy and so on. And occasionally we can all reach level 5, where highly innovative teams work day and night. We work on some big problems. We want to change the world for humanity. So I would say it depends where we are on these levels of maturity.
I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about how in your model, people move from management to leadership. What does it take? And is it just on them to make that happen? Or is there something that we as people who are interested in these topics should be doing to enable that?
I think it starts with the awareness. So awareness that it is possible and it is safe. So we need psychological safety for people to emerge as leaders as well. They have to have the right knowledge and they have to volunteer to step up as leaders. And very practically, what can be done? For example, they could start giving tasks instead of responsibility. Apologize. They should give responsibilities instead of tasks, because giving tasks is micromanagement. Giving responsibility means that you trust people, that they know how to do their job well. It's about decentralizing decision-making, allowing decision-making based on the knowledge, not on a position in organizational hierarchy. It's about igniting sense of purpose, allowing experimentation and tolerating mistakes. It's about facilitating informal networking. It's about asking for feedback. It's about having this big picture, connecting the dots, not just being specialized in one narrow area of specialization. It's about moving more to strategic level from tactical, operational level, and so on. But it's all about also bringing joy, bringing fun, bringing humanness, and bringing hopefulness at work.
Well, and it sounds like what you just described both depends on the person themselves, but also on the larger structure of the organization treating them in a particular way, or their manager or their leader treating them in a particular way.
Absolutely, they are interconnected. Our individual mindset, the way we think, behave, and our emotions and language used and thinking patterns, they have an impact on organizational culture. At the same time, organizational culture will have an impact on our emotions, our feeling, on behavior as well. We know from neuroscience, with our mirror neuron brain cells, we pick up the moods and emotions of people around us. So the better it gets, and vice versa. So the thoughts, the actions are very, very important. They create those ripples, as I said, and impact the culture, and the culture will impact individual as well.
Ricardo, I'd love to turn to you to talk a little bit about the skills required, whether we call it management or we call it leadership. You identified kind of the gap that we're seeing now. What world are we moving into, and what skills are going to be required?
Yeah, I'm just what you just said, Vlatka, was incredible, because I really believe on this human side and this inspirational side, because I was fortunate of having very different experience through my life. I'm saying in completely different scenarios and projects. And one thing that I think the great leader has is this human aspect. It's understanding that you are not a powerhouse or a machine, and that it's not only money that matters, or shareholder value. There is much more on that. And it's to have empathy and being able to inspire people. I truly believe on this kind of contamination. You start contaminating people in a very good sense. It's with the joy and happiness for what you do and the drive. And this is something that really matters when people are trying to make things happen. And this is something that is, I don't know, it's not easy to be taught at the university, or at the school. It's something that you need to live. For example, I was so fortunate because I never expected in my life to work for the UN, honestly. Okay, I'm self-made, and I built my business in other things until the day the phone rings and they invited me, and I started doing things completely different. And I was so contaminated and say, how someone decides to give up on everything, move to Afghanistan, living in a container. And when you go and meet these people, they are the happiest people on earth. And you say, how? And then it contaminates you. Then you want to say, look, I will do my stretch to help on that, because I truly believe. So this empathy, this human side, being able to inspire people, trust, inspire trust. It's not by your role or your position, it's the inspiration. So people trust you and become also adaptable. Because we are living in a world that is changing so dramatically that, you need to be in permanent mutation, to be a true leader, because things that were unimaginable 20 years ago, they are reality now. For example, when I got graduated in chemical engineering, my first moment as a Brazilian, it's I need to find a job because I need to pay my bills. And that's it. I was not concerned. My daughter today, she studies lives in London. Of course, she wants to pay her bills, but it's not only money. She wants to do something meaningful. And this is the inspiration. So this is why some organizations are attracting the best talents. And then you create a positive cycle. Everything, you have better people that stimulate more, and then you create a winning organization or a winning society. And this is, I truly believe that we need to focus on when we think about good leaders.
Ania, can I ask my fellow panelists a question?
Please, go ahead.
So Vlatka and Ricardo, this question is actually addressed to the two of you, I think. We've heard wonderfully idealized words from you about how to have good leadership, but we all know that the world is full of bad leaders and bad managers. So how would you, I'm as interested in the dark side, meaning bad leadership or management, as I am in good. So how would you, how do you argue that your visions should be realized? What needs to happen to our leadership, what I call the leadership industry or leadership education or leadership programs or our conceptions of leadership and management in order for us to get from point A to point B? In other words, point B being the more idealized images that both of you painted.
And I'll just jump in and say that same question basically has come in from a couple of folks over Slido. So it is definitely one we would love to hear from you about.
I'm happy to start. I have been researching this for more than 25 years, and I have a lot of data from my own experience, my own research, and I also researched other people's research on that companies and leaders that they do good, they do well at the same time. This is not mutually exclusive. My latest book, Human Capital, I interviewed 58 leaders. They all confirm the same. It's all about the matter of surviving and thriving, operating from the heart and head, not just from head. So there is a lot of data so that those leaders who are more on level 3, more sort of left brain leaders, they can resonate with that. If I tell them that if they go through the big shift from level 3 to level 4, individually and collectively as an organization, they can increase profit by so much on average, attract talent, keep talent, reduce stress and absenteeism, and we have lots of data from various companies. They will start to listen, and then they will get this awareness. And the first step on the journey is to unlearn the old ways of thinking, being, doing leadership at level 3, and then start adopting new ways of thinking, being, doing at more humane leadership at level 4. And then the better it gets, the better it gets. It's like an upward spiral that then they start going through. I'll stop here.
I want to jump in and say, look, I am very optimistic first, okay? And after all I saw, it's not very easy to be optimistic, mainly on the wars and this. But let me try to give you something. First, it's not a case that we can solve tomorrow. But there is, one day the president of the United States will be someone that is 14 years old now. It will be. So we need to work on the basis. So, for example, what I do a lot in my volunteer work, I talk massively with teenagers and young adults about, what really matters, what is important to look for. So I try to do this at home and with people. Second, you lead by example. So, and I want just to say in a humble example of my personal life. So when I went to the UN, so you all imagine what is for someone that have never worked for anyone else, that left his own company after selling my company and go to the UN, okay? So imagine this change. And I need to tell you that I never wear a suit while everybody was wearing, because I say, look, I brought my brain. It's not the suit. I came with everything. During 5 years, I never, ever flew on UN missions in business class. Never, ever, ever for 5 years, because it's unacceptable for you to take a business class flight to go to South Sudan to save people that are starving. And this is not a matter of entitlement. It's a matter of that. After I did that, I used to have more than 1,000 employees. What happens after? Nobody travels. Everybody start becoming the same, because they use this as inspiration. And I'm saying not only that, but the way you work, the way you inspire. And today, I have never plans to stay at the UN forever. But today, at least, I know that I left, I would say maybe 50, maybe 60 young people that want to be at the UN forever, that can be inspired and plant the seeds. I'm not saying this will solve, but, we need to do this on a constant basis, on the way we educate our children, because we educate our children to the war. It's, you need to survive. And for you to survive, you need to, kill everybody around you. It's like jungle. And it's not like that. Of course, this is not easy to sort out. It's not easy, but it's possible. If we have more people, several organizations are changing. For example, remember 20 years ago, people talking about minority rights and corporate leaders. Nobody was talking about that, right? A corporate leader never talks about LGBT rights or Black people rights. Now, if they don't talk, people get really mad out of them, their own employees. So it's changing. It takes time, but it's changing. And we need to start. We should have started 20 years ago, but if we haven't, we need to start now.
Julia, I would love to hear you comment on this as well. So how as the workplace is changing, to accommodate kind of this shifting idea of what we need from a leader and to bring up those leaders? What else do we need to be doing?
Well, I certainly think we need to separate the idea of leadership as lead by example, which might range on the spectrum from, you know, the virtue signaling and behaving of not, you know, taking too many perks and not having the trappings of power and privilege, from the more sophisticated end of things, which is a lot of organizations and companies are not doing great stuff, you know, and they've been modeled on a concept of growth, which we now know is unsustainable, that we now know, you know, it's difficult to square that circle. And so I think it's important when we take heed of the generations coming beyond us, the millennials and the Zs, that they want purpose and they want values. And that might mean that not every kind of organization survives. And we don't talk about that because in the end, you know, we want it all. And my point is that if you really want to get the right decisions done and the right behaviors happening, you might have to stop stuff and do stuff differently. And I'd love for us to hear from our audience about their view on this. And I'm particularly interested in the context of COVID and the leadership of institutions like the WHO, which is, of course, a subset of the UN, which is, of course, you know, but in the end, I feel, should we be talking about whether certain organizations become too unwieldy to be able to function regardless of who is inspiring in one corner of the room? You know, we need to have these difficult conversations as well as, obviously, you know, you want leaders who are inspiring. Obviously, you want to get up Vlatka's, you know, league table and so on and so forth. But I think we need to have a much more profound conversation, which I believe Peter Drucker had, about what is the point of all of this? What are our values? Why do we do any of what we do? And the idea that absolutely anything goes, regardless of what you produce, regardless of what you sell, regardless of how you're governed, is in the end can be improved on. I don't know. I think we might need to really dismantle some things in order to remake them.
Barbara, would you want to weigh in on this too?
No, I asked the question, so of
I
course
know.
I have no opinion at all.
Yeah, may I just add one thing? I agree completely with Julia. And one thing that for me is very important about companies is that there is a permanent desire of companies to survive forever. And on this journey of trying to survive forever, they create much more damage than they should, you know, and people don't know where it's the time to stop. And this is, for example, I saw so many examples in the US. So corporations that are not well, and they take more funds and they take more, and then they don't change, they don't transform, they don't change their culture. And at the end, they create a much bigger damage. And this is something we need to address. And another comment I want to make also on the same point is that I truly believe that we need to have a deeper conversation on that. My only concern is that sometimes we spend too much time talking and less time acting, you know, and life is passing, you know, and then we become old and then it's over already, you know. We are talking about climate change for 20 years. You know what? We are waiting. We are waiting, you know, people start dying, everybody to take an action. So I think that we need to balance this with some concrete actions always.
And I would like to add, yes, millennials, they are looking for purpose, they want feedback, they are mobile, but in very similar way, knowledge workers are in the similar category and they need to be treated as associates, not as subordinates. They're intrinsically motivated, they can just withdraw their cooperation. and millennials will form majority of workforce quite soon. So because of that, these old management styles and even leadership style, however we call them, based on command and control, they just don't work. And we know corporate life expectancy is diminishing, performance is low as well. So there's so much data we have that just show business as usual is not an option anymore.
Ania, I would just say one sentence, which is that I very much appreciate the responses I got to my question. However, I will offer a sort of jaundiced view, which is they're based on individuals working and wanting to do good. The question for our profession, that is so-called leadership experts and management experts, is how do we take these individual silos and spread them in a large way so that, in fact, the field, so that there's a contagion effect, so that the field, not just the individual silos, but so that we can educate more broadly and humanely in the ways that are being proposed. But however noble you are, Ricardo, and I so appreciate how you described your own work, the question is, how do we take people like you and clone you over and over again beyond the 60 young people that you talk to? We need 600, we need 6,000, we need 600,000. In other words, this is also a question of how those of us who think about these things organize ourselves and create larger change than as a group than anything we can possibly do as individuals.
But could I just jump in, Ania, 1 second, and just
Sure.
on that point? I mean, I think there are limits to the individual, which is partly why the deification idea of the leader is so flawed, because a lot of the failures and the bad leadership that you point out, Barbara, is very closely linked to systemic structural problems. The Grenfell Tower fire, which haunts the memory of London, where a young student of mine died, was a failure of system as much as it was a failure of individual leadership. It was a completely egregious structural setup that when you look back on it, you think, my God, how did that even work? And so I think that the other enemy I would put into that mix actually is scale. Scale is a problem. I know from a highly regarded individual who works in another corner of the UN, which I won't name, that you need something called visas to get sign off on something in this corner of the UN. It's actually apparently an internal term called visa, and it means you have to apply in order to get a decision through, and it goes through layers. But actually, on some level, it doesn't matter who the people are in those layers, it's the layers. And so one of the things that I welcomed about the discussion of agile and disruption is, for me, it's about cutting through complexity. It's about honoring reality that no person can cope with too much complexity, because we tune out, we drop out, we degrade our attention. So I do think it's important for behavior and example and inspiration, all of that. But I think we need to reform and restructure. And the final point on this is a great metaphor now is the office space itself. It's why I've taken over chairing the Workshift Commission to look at the future of work itself and the workplace itself. Because you look at the radical reshaping of how and where and when we work in the structure of work, and you start to see some shifts that I'd like to align not just leaders and managers, but leaders, managers, places, and structures.
How do you see, I'm so curious, how you see our dramatic shift in where we work in the past couple of months affecting these structures?
Well, I think one of the biggest shifts is that in the UK now, at the moment, the last figures for the last quarter from the Office for National Statistics show that 30% of people are working from home. There's been a the biggest drop since 1994 in square footage of property being let and leased in central London. Those are just UK figures. So there's a quantum shift in the expectation that we will be anything other than hybrid, that we will work on the move, that we will work from home, that we will work in spaces that will be configured for a much more networked, social, collaborative way of being. And I feel that that's good, but if the fundamental structure is still the quarterly report, the system within the system within the system, the boards underneath the whatever, I mean, it's just a recipe for disaster. So I do think that we have to reframe and reset where we work and how we work and who we work with and who we work to, and also the systems that surround it. Otherwise, if it's not holistic, I think we're in difficulty. And again, I'm sorry to be the cuckoo in the nest, but in a way, I feel that actually, again, if Peter Drucker were here, would he be saying that endlessly discussing leadership v. management is helpful? I don't think he would.
I'd like to go back to the concept of bad leaders and bad leadership. And this idea that several of you have put forth about purpose being kind of at the core of where we need to go with leadership. And I wonder, what do we do with a leader who is incredibly effective, but whose purpose is not one that we think of as good or that we agree with, or maybe is just more neutral? Do we call that good leadership? Do we still learn from that person? Do we say they're fundamentally flawed? What are some examples that we can draw on to kind of avoid their fate? Maybe Barbara, I'll start with you because you're deep in these bad leaders.
Yeah, I am very interested in bad leadership, no more than good, but as much so. By the way, there's no such thing as a bad leader without bad followers. I'm not sure, we're probably getting maybe a little off the topic here, and we probably hear from some members of the audience as well. It's a whole great conversation, Ania, that I hope someday can be had at much greater length than the few minutes remaining. Basically, I divide, when I'm talking about good and bad, and I've written about this extensively, I have two axes. One is effective and ineffective. The other axis is ethical and unethical. So it is quite possible to be an ethical leader, but at the same time, an ineffective one. So you can say that a really bad leader is both unethical and ineffective. But, an example that I sometimes use, especially with later audiences, is about Adolf Hitler. It can reasonably be said that between 1933 and 1939, he was a, quote, good leader in that he was inordinately effective. He was also inordinately unethical, but precisely as you imply in your question, Ania, when we start having this conversation, which again is way larger than we can possibly accommodate, making the distinction between ethical and unethical on the one hand, and or one axis and the other axis, effective and ineffective, I think is key, lest we again get tangled up in the semantics.
Thanks.
I would say that every leader should lead for good of all stakeholders, society and customers and employees and so on. And I think it's better to have ethical leader who is ineffective than unethical leader who is effective in doing what they're doing. So doing good and doing well, I think that should be the main mantra for leadership.
Are there any companies in your experience or organizations that are particularly good at creating and continuing to generate good leaders, purposeful leaders, ones who inspire on the ethical axis?
I can share a few examples very briefly. Some of the CEOs I interviewed for human capital research. Even in the public sector, it's possible to do it. Example is Innovation Norway, where a CEO, Anita Krontraset, she shifted the whole Innovation Norway from level 3 to level 4 within 12 months or so. And the results were absolutely astonishing. I published several articles explaining what exactly she did to achieve that. But just to give you a few data points, they managed to reduce the time that it takes to process startup grant applications for entrepreneurs from 60 to 4 days. And all other data points changed, much less stress and absenteeism, increased revenue for entrepreneurs working with them, and so on. So it's possible to do it in public sector as well as in private sector. Buurtzorg is one of the case study, and I think we heard about that already. A small company based in the UK, but the CEO lives and works in French Alps because he loves French Alps, and so they're having meetings there, and basically they make employees' dreams come true. So every month, every employee writes on a piece of paper what is their dream, and they put it in a box, and as soon as they reach monthly target, they will take this piece of paper out and they will see, for example, John wants to take family to safari in Africa, and family and company pays for that. And it's a small gesture, but they have a queue of talent wanting to work there, and the revenue keeps increasing year after year. So it's all about putting people first, not numbers, and then numbers will take care of themselves.
Ania, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah, I want probably more to you, Barbara, and I don't know if you have the answer, but we were talking about bad leaders, and we were talking about, for example, how you can create a structure that is scalable and that allow. So what I can see, and I'm trying to be as much as I can apolitical, but for example, you know, how in countries like US or in countries like Brazil, you know, one leader can flip everything, absolutely all the system that is in place, I'm saying for years and years, to give this and just flip that. And I don't want to say for the bad or for the good, this is a personal judgment of each one, but and it's the same for companies. For example, when the company changes its leadership, I would say his main executive, sometimes they just disappear or sometimes they just go up. So I'm talking about this very specific example. I'm saying this top leaders that just disrupt everything and they just change everything. And you think that you have, I would say, a set of policies in place to make sure that it's protected, but suddenly everything just collapses. You know, on what's the version of reality, what is fake news, what is true news. You know, we don't know this anymore. And this happened in such a fast pace, right? We are talking, but maybe you will tell me that this is, you know, much longer. So I would love to hear from you on that.
So very, very quickly, Ricardo, yes, it's much longer. However, that's not going to stop me from giving you a very short answer. I said in passing that you cannot have, let's just, for the sake of this conversation, this is not an opinion, but let's just say that I am deducing from your question, which for this, again, just for the sake of the conversation, that it's about America, the United States of America under the presidency of Donald Trump. So whether you think that he is good or bad, let's just call him a major disruptor. And I agree 1,000%, Ricardo, with your premise. What has gone on in the United States of America for the last few years has been, for better or worse, however you look at it, a major disruption. Institutions that we thought were rock solid appear not to be. So in order to achieve economy in my reply, but I hope give you some understanding of what has happened, when I said in passing that bad followers or followers, let's just drop the word bad, are key to understanding what happened, I will simply single out for my reply the Republican-controlled Senate. Many Americans have for years waited for Republican senators to take issue with the President of the United States. Essentially, they virtually, with hardly any exceptions, in a 3 to 4 year period, they did not do this. They were completely compliant, or if you prefer, the word complicit. Therefore, that will give you some understanding. Donald Trump could never have done what he did without the Republican Senate being nearly entirely complicit. So you need to look at what I always call the leadership system. Leadership system consists of three parts. The leader, Trump, absolutely important, key, but equally important are his followers, or followers generally, and equally important is the context within which leaders and followers are embedded. If you look at this systematically, as opposed to just through the lens of the leader, how what happened becomes that much clearer.
Ania, can I ask a question of my fellow panelists about?
Go ahead.
So I would like to ask you about the leadership and followers axis, which is fascinating, around the World Health Organization and its response to COVID. David Nabarro, I believe, is showing excellent leadership of the main dialogue around the handling of the COVID crisis. And yet the followership around the world of recommendations by the WHO, where is that followership? How much leadership do my fellow panelists think the World Health Organization is able to give, is giving, and what's the state of the followership?
Perhaps I would say that
I'll give you 2 sentences because we want everybody to weigh in here, and our time is dwindling. The world has, as the point was made earlier, I think by you, Ania, the world is changing. The relationship between, unless you're in an authoritarian/totalitarian system, the balance of power between leaders and followers has changed in favor of followers. In other words, leaders have way less power, authority, and influence than they did, and followers have much more, unless, by the way, this explains the rise in totalitarian/authoritarian systems. So if you understand the changing relationship, the disparagement, for example, of experts, you will understand why now, let's say, Julia, that the World Health Organization walked on water and its leadership walked on water. Getting followers to comply in this day and age is a vastly more, voluntarily, is a vastly more difficult task than it was, let's say, 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Vlatka, I'll turn to you.
I would just say, given that there were some slightly conflicting reports coming from what has been going on around the whole situation, I would say that what we do need and what we did need is a more decentralized leadership to handle the whole situation with the pandemic, rather than everything being imposed top down everywhere, where a situation might have been different, local conditions might be different, and so on. So I will stop here.
I want to go back to
Isn't the World Health Organization supposed to be a leadership organization? My point is, again, back to structures as much as anything else, that, what is the point in something being labeled as a leadership entity if it can't lead, either to Barbara's point about the degrading of the validity of a leadership in a followership era, or doesn't that bring us, Vlatka, to the absolutely central question about what is leadership, if in fact an organization that is supposed to be leading on global health, it's called the World Health Organization. If the World Health Organization is not in fact a leadership organization, then what is the point in having it at the helm of the response to the pandemic? And I say that as somebody who supports what it's trying to do. But to Barbara's point, it's sort of being ignored a bit.
Yes.
So what's that about? Where does that fit in this conversation? Maybe we can hear from other people. What is the point of leadership if a leadership organization responsible for global health in the middle of a global health pandemic is in fact manifestly unable to lead?
As I said, Julia, this is about voluntary compliance. And when someone like the President of the United States thumbs his nose at something, such as the World Health Organization, you have a leadership organization that cannot lead because the followers are not following. Sorry, Ricardo.
No, yeah, this is what I was about to say. So first is that at the UN, people are not required to follow, okay? And this is the first. And you know, this, what I would say, it will be sad for many people, but you know, many of the countries or the leading countries, they use the system when it's convenient for them. You know, when it's convenient to blame someone, then we have a good spot. When it's convenient, because it's a much bigger issue on that. And this is the whole UN system, World Trade Organization. You know, you use it when it's convenient for you to use. And they don't have the mandatory. So when it's time to blame someone, then you have a good person. But when it's time to solve your problem, you just don't listen. So it's a very complex scenario, because I don't think that they have the leadership, despite of having the name, and they are empowered to lead. You know, this is just, please, my absolutely personal comment on that.
The other question is how much centralized leadership we need comparing to decentralized leadership, and what would be the consequences of having too much centralized leadership. And I think we do need to have some difficult conversations and also ask some difficult questions as well. And the truth needs to be discovered. It can't be taught. So it's a complex conversation.
I think one of the questions that has resounded throughout this entire conference has been what has been the kind of vacuum of leadership, or what has been missing in the leadership of this particular crisis. And I think we're kind of really getting at it here. I'm keeping an eye on the clock. And I'm told we need to end just a few minutes early to cut everyone over to what's next on the program. But I wonder if we could have some closing comments from our panelists kind of on that broader question. And if we're reflecting on the ways that we talked about both management and leadership and the ways that they blend and kind of the hybrid model that we talked about, what are our hopes for the months to come if that leadership were finally to emerge or to step up? What would that look like? And maybe Julia, I'll start with you.
Oh, okay. What does success look like? The great one. Well, for me, you know, when I talk about simplicity cutting through complexity, the first principle is clarity. And the first subsect of getting to clarity is the decision. So decisions have to be made. Is the World Health Organization, I'm only picking on the World Health Organization because it's the central body in the pandemic, is the World Health Organization trying to tell other countries what to do, or isn't it? It has to decide. If it's deciding that that is the case, regardless of one individual actor, albeit a very significant one, the President of the United States, who may change in a week's time, may not, is it therefore the case that the World Health Organization has to call out anyone who is not complying and challenge their followers because they have made a decision that they want to play a leading role? Or is it the case that, to Vlatka's point and to the many localized ways in which we're handling this pandemic, it is the case that the World Health Organization has to forfeit its claim to be leading on the health handling of this pandemic, which in my mind might be a valid thing to do in a world of distributed networks, in a 21st century digital always on era, which is not as able to command compliance as a previous era. But for me, what you can't have is a vacuum where no one is deciding and everybody's carrying on with the old model. So for it, I would just finish, it's all about the action. So The World Health Organization needs to decide, does it want to force all countries to comply and what with? And does it want to invite countries voluntarily to withdraw from it if they don't want to comply? Or does it want to play more of a convening role? What is the decision? That would be my closing point. Leadership for me is agency, decision, clarity, cut through. When it comes in particular to leadership organizations and institutions.
Thank you. And Vlatka, what about you?
For me, leadership and management, as I said, are just a label. It all comes down to being a decent human being. And whether somebody has a formal leadership role or a formal management role, there are some points that are really important right now, such as building the connection, trusting that people know how to do their work. And the whole pandemic has accelerated this shift towards more what I call level 4, because people work from home. So leaders or managers have to trust that people know how to do their work well. It doesn't matter when and how and where they do it. So I can see acceleration of this trend. And through various surveys, we see that perhaps 60-70% of people, they want to continue working from home, or at least have a choice where they work, and maybe occasionally meet in offices, which I think is very, very important to keep this human connection. It's all about building a sense of community and collaboration, compassion, leading from the head and heart, not just leading from the head. It's about...
I think I'll need to cut you off there just to keep us moving. And I'll go to Barb. Thank you. We'll go to Barbara next.
Okay, I'm going to stick with your COVID question, Ania, and I'm simply going to point to the difference between some Asian countries and some Western liberal democracies. If you're looking at South Korea or Japan or Taiwan, you're getting extremely effective leadership. Arguably in China, which I'm not going to go into, they had a draconian lockdown. Bottom line, however, is that 6 months later, life there has returned more or less to normal. So what do we mean when we say good leadership? Effective, ineffective, ethical, unethical? Meanwhile, Europe and the United States, to put it mildly, are struggling.
Thanks. And Ricardo, what about you?
Yeah, no, I just first, thank you very much for the opportunity. I just want to say one thing is that I'm talking in a very pragmatic way. We need to start doing something, and we need to start now. And we can do that. I always remember my daughter when she was young, she said, Dad, we need to save the planet. And I said to her, yes, we need to save, but let's start by making your bed. You know, there are so many things we can do now, you know, in our local community, and this that can help to contact, because if we wait just the top guys to solve the problems of the world, we may wait a lot. And this is my call for urgency. So thank you very much, Ania. Thank you for that.
That's great. Okay? Thank you, all four of you. Everybody go make your bed. It's been great being with you. Thank you to the Drucker Forum for letting us have this conversation. And we'll let you all go to the next session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
That is discipline. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.
I have just one last question, maybe because there is 2 minutes left. You were over time. Please put into the chat one insight that everyone takes away from the last 90 minutes, so everyone can look at this. And then there is another thing, maybe it's interesting for you. If you go to the chat, there is on the right bottom down 3 dots. And when you click on there, you can save the chat, because I think there were many interesting conversations beside that, and especially for the speakers, that may be a nice way to stay in contact or meet at the networking launch, whatever you want to do. Takeaway, here they are coming. Key takeaway, humanness is everything. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Be well and safe. Fantastic topic and panel. There is a lot of thank you just saying, so perfect. On this side, I would like to say a very nice evening and enjoy the rest of the Peter Drucker Forum. Bye-bye.